Gus T Renegade, context of white supremacy. I think I've made a lot of errors in running the cows. One decision I am completely satisfied with, playing Michael Jackson to open the programs. Probably would have been a little bit better if I had been playing them before he passed, but I'm very satisfied with that decision. For sure, a victim of white supremacy. I actually have a word or two to say about that later in the program. Greetings, everybody in the chat room. If you're tuning in to the archives, thank you for supporting the program. Please subscribe to the cows. The link is in the description. If you are listening from Blog Talk Radio, just click on the little blue link, and you will get email updates. Anytime I do a new program, you will be alerted. You'll be the first to know. Also, it would help, please, favorite the show. If you're listening at Blog Talk Radio, all you have to do is click the red heart in the player on the page, and that will favorite the show. Very helpful in getting the show featured and all that good stuff. Plus, you'll be in the know because there are a lot of shows coming up for August. I will be back this Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Frank Wu will be here. He is the author of Yellow, professor at Howard University. We'll be talking about affirmative action, the model minority myth, how Asians perceive themselves relative to white people and black people. Also talking about his experience as a so-called Asian at a historically black university. Very much looking forward to that. Frank Wu, that's Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Sunday this week, Dorothy Roberts. She'll be here. She is a professor at Northwestern, black female. Her book, Killing the Black Body, it is about, and she says it in the book, I love it, she says it in the book, how the system of white supremacy has abused and controlled the reproductive rights of black females since slavery. She talks about Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, whole nine. She will be here this Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific. And this is a couple weeks down the road, but I'm very excited. Six-term, make sure I'm correct about that, six-term House of Representative member and 2008 Green Party presidential candidate Cynthia McKinney will be here August 18th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Down the road, very excited about that, to hear her chat about the system of racism. So please support the cows. Lots of shows coming up. At any rate, getting back to business today, I also want to definitely make sure you support Cree 7, counter-racist evolving engineer here at Blog Talk Radio, doing fabulous work. Support her program. She has a show coming up on the 16th as well. That'll be at 5 p.m. Eastern. Please check her program out. Excellent non-white person who is working to replace white supremacy with justice. Today's show, excellent for two reasons. One, return guest, Jessica Pettitt, admitted racist white supremacist. She is on the program. Also, today's show, watershed moment for the cows, brand new co-host. I've been doing the program first and foremost with Back of the Bus and Gus when we were doing it at Rainy Dog Radio. Definite appreciation for all his efforts. He's listening to the program. Continue your focus, constructive focus on replacing white supremacy with justice. Definitely the foundation for the cows, Back of the Bus and Gus. Brand new co-host. Are you there, Jay? Oh, she's supposed to be there. Are you there?
Yeah, yes.
There we go. Brand new co-host. Can you please tell our listeners, tell them your name, anything else you think would be helpful for them to know about the brand new co-host on the cows?
I'm Justice.
Okay. Anything else you would like to tell our listeners, Justice?
I am trying to eliminate. I'm trying to support justice and erase white supremacy.
Dig it. Support justice and erase white supremacy. I dig it. And would you mind telling our listeners, this is impolite to ask most females, but I think it's acceptable here. Would you mind telling our listeners how old you are?
10.
10. And you are non-white, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Outstanding. Brand new co-host, back of the bus, and Justice, holding down the cows to get constructive information about replacing white supremacy with justice. She will have questions. I will have questions. If you call in today, please say something nice about brand new co-host so she feels welcome, comfortable, and happy moving forward. Today's guest, Jessica Pettitt. Are you there?
I am. Thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you. She, again, phoned in, working with my limited resources, phoned in to make this program happen, to share constructive information with our listeners. Many of the folks, I don't know if you heard when Jessica Pettitt was on the program just a couple weeks ago, many of the non-white listeners felt she had very constructive information to share, and several of them requested that I make an effort to get her back. She was willing to come share again, so here we are. For folks who may not have heard that program, I know Justice was not here. Could you tell them anything you think would be important about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Jess Pettitt, and I am a white person who very much benefits from white supremacy, and probably since 2003, 2004, began to be conscious of the work that I could do to dismantle the white supremacy. Now I work full-time, traveling around mostly to colleges and universities, doing some community or organizational-based work, working specifically with white privilege, social justice issues, and LGBT inclusion, to really talk about how we can dismantle white supremacy, other forms of oppression. So, and I'm really happy to be back, so thank you for having me back on.
Outstanding. Outstanding. As our co-host, smart as a tack, but 10. We all will need to work to make sure your term, our vocabulary level, very low today, so that we promote understanding for everyone who is participating in the broadcast. And Justice, you're going to make sure if you don't understand things that are being said, you're going to make sure that you speak up very loud and clear and let us know that you don't understand, or if you need a term explained, you're going to make sure that we do that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okie dokie.
And thank you for that as well. I appreciate that.
Right on. I will defer to the co-host. Do you have a question that you would like to start off with for Jessica Pettitt today?
Yes. Do all white people practice racism, white supremacy?
I think that it's a very good question. I think that my belief system is definitely all white people benefit from white supremacy. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of, if not even the majority of, I don't think most white people realize that they are benefiting from a white supremacist system, and that they play a part in that system staying in place. By not realizing it, I think that there's still a degree of responsibility that they have that keeps white supremacy in place, whether they know about it or not.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Justice, your question was, do all white people practice racism, white supremacy? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And Jess, that you said you would prefer Jess. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Jess, you said that you believe that all white people benefit from being white in a system of white supremacy. You don't think all of them know necessarily that they are white in a system of white supremacy and what that means, but you think they all benefit. Not, at least for me, I don't think that is a clear answer to the question. So I'll re-ask, do all white people practice racism, white supremacy?
Yes. The reason... Go ahead, Justice. I'm sorry.
Which is, what does benefit mean? Can you explain it in a 10-year-old way?
I can do my best. So the reason why I can't just say, yes, all white people practice racism is because I think the vast majority of white people don't know that they have a part to play in racism. By the fact that we have a white supremacist system that we live in, all white people benefit, so a new word for benefit, I guess, would be get things for free, have special favors, are able to function, whether it's through the job they have, the education they have, relationships, their ability to get jobs, education, food, roof over their head, etc., that all of that is made a lot easier because of the system of white supremacy. I think part of that system is creating a way for white people to not know that it exists. Kind of like a fish in a fishbowl. The fish may not know that the fish is surrounded by water, but without the water, the fish wouldn't live. So it takes, there's a very small percentage, I believe, of white people who have stopped and realized, to use the fish in the fishbowl metaphor, that they are swimming in water and that water is made up by other people to decide who's better and who's worse, and that doesn't make any sense. So the small percentage of us that do anti-racism work, I feel that's what we're doing, is in our fight for justice, we're trying to look at these benefits that we, and I'm one of them, have received, so that we can replace this system with justice, so that it's more equitable for everyone.
Okay.
Do you understand what she meant when she said benefit now? Is that clear for you, Justice?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do Martin Kevorkian's. If you had to explain to another 10-year-old how white people benefit based on what Jess just said, what would you tell them?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you say that again?
I'm sorry?
One more time? Can you say that again one more time?
Sure. Based on what Jess just explained to you about the word benefit, what would you tell another non-white person if you were going to explain to them how white people benefit from the system of white supremacy? What would you tell another 10-year-old?
That's kind of hard for me to explain it to another 10-year-old.
Or,
Can I try and give a more specific example?
Yeah.
An explanation would be better? Examples tend to be substitutes for explanations. Like if I ask for a definition of a term, if I ask for what do you mean when you say emergency, and you say, oh, well, I broke my arm, that's an emergency. That's an example. You really haven't explained exactly what an emergency is and why breaking your arm is an emergency. So I would appreciate if you could give an example and a clear explanation so that Justice could easily tell another 10-year-old how white people benefit from the system of white supremacy.
Well, again, I will do my best, but I don't think it's that simple. I mean, I think how white supremacy works is to make this much more complicated than just an answer that can then be reported out to another person. So it doesn't make sense if a 10-year-old, like Justice, I wouldn't, in using some kind of explanation for you, my guess is that you've never tried to rent an apartment or get a job or things like that. But that if it is based in explanation, if it is easier to say that as a white person, I get pretty much everything I want before I even know I wanted it. So because I get, again, I'm derailing to metaphors, but I'm trying not to. I'm trying to follow your directions. So if I was, let's say that I'm going to use a metaphor because I can't do this otherwise. If I'm walking across a desert, like it's really dry, it's really hot, etc., and so some people are aware that it is dry and that it's really hot and that this is a really big giant desert. So as a white person, if I was being placed in this white supremacy-based desert, I would never be hot, I would never be thirsty, and I wouldn't necessarily even feel like I was trapped in a big place of sand. Because the system is actually developed by me and people like me to benefit people like me. So I never ever feel thirsty because I get everything I need before I want it.
Okay.
So if I've never wanted anything, what I was saying earlier is that if continuing this on, if I've never really ever wanted anything because I'm always getting it before I actually want it, then I think it's hard for some white people to be, if not most white people, to ever understand that they got something before they wanted it. Because they never, it came so early that they never actually wanted it. It was just magically there. And so when you ask, do all white people practice racism, at the root of it, the answer is yes. It's just that the vast majority of white people don't even know that they're doing it. Because they never need to question it, or they've never had to pay attention to it. Good?
Yep.
Okay. So, Justice, if you had to explain to someone else, 10-year-old, someone in your family, how white people benefit from the system of white supremacy based on what Jess just shared, what would you tell them?
I would tell them how white supremacy is being confused by other non-white people.
White supremacy is confused by other non-white people?
Yeah.
How do white people benefit from white supremacy? What would you tell them if you were going to explain that?
It's kind of hard for me to explain benefit.
Very interesting. This, I hope, everyone listening, and brilliant illustration of why I wanted Justice to co-host the show, and I think you are doing a fantastic job, and I'm ecstatic about you hanging out and co-hosting future shows for the cows. Being able to explain things so that individuals understand, particularly so that non-white people understand what is said, is very important. If I could take a crack at how I would explain white people benefiting in the system of white supremacy, I would say the system of white supremacy makes it very easy for white people worldwide to do things. It makes it very easy for people classified as white to do pretty much anything they would like to do. If you would like to go to school and do well, being a white person, it's going to be much easier for you than a non-white person. If you would like to travel and go to different places, it's going to be much easier for you as a white person. If you would like to make a lot of money, it's going to be much easier for you as a white person. And unfortunately, the bad side of that, if you are a non-white person, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to do things in a system of white supremacy. If you'd like to go to school, be a doctor, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you if you're not white. If you'd like to make a lot of money, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you if you are not white. If you'd like to travel, go to different places, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you if you are not white. That would be my explanation for white people benefiting from the system of white supremacy. It is easier for white people to do almost anything because they are white in a system of white supremacy. Does that make sense, Justice?
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Okay. Could you, based on what I just said, if you had to explain to someone else how white people benefit from white supremacy, what would you say?
Can you say that question one more time?
Sure. If you were going to explain to someone else, another 10-year-old, maybe you have older friends, I don't know, a 12-year-old, or someone in your family, if you were going to explain to them how white people benefit from the system of white supremacy, what would you say?
I would say that white people have been mistreating a lot of non-white people, and white people should stop white supremacy immediately.
Right on. That right there, what you just said, excellent. I'm not sure if that explains the term benefit, but this is, in my view, very important work in replacing white supremacy with justice. Everyone who says they're about this getting very good, getting extraordinarily efficient in their ability to explain how this system works so that non-white people understand and can work to help replace white supremacy with justice. I think that is a huge problem right now, that people who allege that they want to replace white supremacy with justice really are not doing enough to make sure that the non-white people grasp what is being said. And I hope with Justice being here, myself, and the guests, we will all make an effort to get better about doing that. Do you have a view on that, Jess?
I think what you said is accurate. I also think that in order to articulate or to say what your explanation is, you also had to use examples. Some of the things that are being brought up are really complicated, and they're hard to address in a direct manner. They're hard to explain, and part of white supremacy is making it very hard to name and pinpoint and to really be able to identify them, which is why using examples or stories or personal experiences I think are so important. So I think you did the same thing.
I agree. I used an example, but I started with an explanation. I think metaphors can be very helpful in understanding. Examples can be very helpful in understanding. But I also think it's very important that you clearly explain what it is being discussed, whether it's a word or an idea, needs to be clearly explained in addition to providing an example. I have found that works much better in terms of generating clarity and not just saying, well, I will tell you what an emergency is by giving you an example. I have found that a lot of problems can come from presenting an example without an explanation. A lot of problems I've just generally seen where it is not constructive at all.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Okay.
I think that the fact that things are made very much easier for white people in a system of white supremacy is a truth. What that means and how that can fit in with people's understanding of the world, I think, is different for each person. And so that's the bonus of language, is that you get to use words that different people can understand based on whether they want to travel or they want to be a doctor or they know what a desert looks like, etc.
For sure.
Next question.
I will see. Justice. Do you have a question? I have one, but I will definitely check. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask?
Yes, I do have a few questions.
Great.
Go right ahead.
To white people, does skin color matter to them a lot? Or, like, a little enough?
Do you mean their own skin color or the skin color of other people?
Of other people.
I think that most white people have been taught that the answer is no, and that they don't see a difference in skin color of people. I think that is part of a much bigger problem. Of course, white people can see skin color when it's not white, because they are able. How white supremacy works is that white people are able to identify who is white and who is not white, regardless of how the other person may or may not identify themselves as white or not white. So I think that skin color is how white people make a lot of decisions throughout their day, like who to sit next to on the train, who to become friends with, which picture to use if you're making a poster, who to talk to, who to have a crush on, what to expect from a teacher, what to expect from a neighbor or a stranger. So I think it's, under white supremacy, I think that it's one of the most important things that white people look at, and I think they're taught to say that they don't see skin color, which doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
That made sense to you, Justice?
Yep.
Okay. You said you had several questions. If you have more questions, feel free. Continue.
Okay. As far as, hang on, does religion matter to non-white people or white people?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand the question. Do you mind saying it again?
Yeah. Does religion matter to non-white people or white people?
Religion?
Yeah, religion.
I think that a lot of people, no matter what color their skin is, turn to religion. Either they use religion so that they can find out what happens after they die, or how to make good decisions while they're alive, make other friends, build community. I think that that's important to a lot of people, regardless of their skin color. I also think that religion has gotten a very bad image because of a lot of big mistakes that the organizers or leaders of some religions, specifically I would say Protestant-based Christian religions, have made around money. And so a lot of people also ignore religion as an option and are able to find answers or no answers and are comfortable with that as far as what happens when you die or not die. But I don't think that has anything to do with skin color. I do think that how white supremacy has impacted figures like Jesus, for example, is usually, in pictures, Jesus is usually a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes, which makes no sense based on the stories of where Jesus was born and where he lived and the people that he worked with. It would make no sense that that person would be white with blonde hair and blue eyes. But I think how white supremacy works with those images is that white people want to see the son of the God that they believe in to look like them and don't want to be upset by it looking like anyone else. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Do you have more questions, Justice? If you do, please feel free to ask if you have more questions.
Not right now. I'll still think of some.
Oh, please do. Please do. I will ask a couple, and I will check as we go on to make sure you get your questions out as we go. Jess, I wanted to touch on something that you said in a previous answer to one of Justice's questions. You said that white people make distinctions on who is white, who is not white. Do you think it is correct to say that every white person in the system of white supremacy, one thing they have to do is to be able to pick out who is white and who is not white? Do you think that is correct in the system of white supremacy?
Yes, absolutely. The question is whether they do it consciously or not. But yes, absolutely. You have to determine who's on your team and who is on a different team.
Okay. It is very difficult for me to think how a white person can pick out who is white and who is not white and for that to be done unconsciously, particularly since you get in trouble if you are a white person and you make errors in picking out who is white and who is not white. Other white people will let you know that you have made a mistake. That, to me, right there, makes me think there's no way this can be unconscious, that we are making these distinctions on who can be mistreated because they are not white.
Do you want me to comment on that?
Please do.
I think that what you're saying, of course, makes sense. The only thing I would add is that most white people segregate themselves throughout their entire life, where they don't actually have to interact with that many non-white people. So the instances where they make the choice to or not to mislabel a non-white person doesn't happen that often, because we still live in primarily or mostly very segregated neighborhoods where white people live here and non-white people live someplace else. We go to very segregated schools. We go to very segregated banks. We go to segregated restaurants. And so I don't think the opportunity to make the error happens as often as what you said made me feel like you meant. So maybe I'm wrong. And yes, when it does happen, when someone does make a mistake, you're scolded for two reasons. One is you should never give someone white privilege if they don't deserve it. You shouldn't be giving that away, I think, is one of the underlying lessons of white supremacy. And the second one is that if you actually mess up, then you start, I think the thought is you become a traitor to, I think some people would call me a traitor, and that I share the secrets of white supremacy out loud with other people and give benefits or good things to people regardless of whether or not I have identified them as white, which makes white people really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Gus T Renegade and Justice, Context of White Supremacy, our guest, Jessica Pettitt. I wanted to point out for our listeners, my initial thought was I was going to say this is not a personal attack. And again, it's not personal. It's just business. This is the business of replacing white supremacy with justice. One tendency that I have found when talking to white people, admitted racist white supremacists, is that they will concede on a point, but then speak for quite a bit of time talking away from what they agreed upon. I suspect that often this is done consciously to practice racism, white supremacy. Not saying that you did that, but it is something that I think is important because I've seen this a lot in talking to white people. And I wanted to point out for the listeners, you agreed. It makes sense, and that in the system of white supremacy, white people make distinctions about who is white, who is non-white. More accurately, they decide who is white and who is not white. And I believe this is done consciously. You said that, mostly white people in this area of the world live in so-called segregated areas where there are not a lot of non-white people around, which in my view would only further evidence that this is done consciously, because there are a lot of examples of non-white people stumbling, fumbling, finding their way into these white areas, and it becomes an immediate problem, and frequently the white people have left quickly. That in my view, would continue to evidence that this is done consciously, that distinctions are made who is white, who is not white, and for the sole purpose of practicing racism, white supremacy, and that this is conscious. And I'm really making an effort to point this out because I feel like, one, I feel it's very deceptive for any white person to say that, no, this doesn't happen, no, it's not conscious. I feel it's very deceptive because there's just too much evidence to the contrary. And I feel that this is a big part of practicing racism, white supremacy, designating who are the non-white people. It's basically saying these are the people that can be mistreated. That's what it means to be classified as not white. You are eligible and should be mistreated on that basis all the time, worldwide, every day, for as long as we see fit, to infinity. Do you feel that that is accurate?
I have two things to add. First, this work is personal. It's not just professional for me. I think that's an important clarification. Two, I think that you're blurring two things together, and that whether someone is conscious or unconscious does not mean that they are or are not supporting white supremacy. White supremacy is being supported by white people's conscious and unconscious behaviors. I think I have lived in white supremacy as a white person and am coming much more aware with what I have learned through white supremacy. And so what I'm trying to share with you and your listeners is that the decisions that are made about who is non-white and who is white are critical, and those decisions are usually not consciously made based on race, because we have been told you're not supposed to make decisions based on race, which this is how white supremacy stays in place. So I make decisions based on who the poor people are. I make decisions based on who lives on that side of town. I make decisions of what schools to go to because this just happens to be the good school. So part of the subconsciousness or unconscious racism that is existing is part of white supremacy is giving me all different kinds of language to pay attention to so that I can actually feel like I'm not making a decision based on race. A perfect example, I think, are these birthers that are wanting to know whether or not, or they're claiming that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. There was an interview with one person, a white woman, who stated, "I want my country back." That is a really powerful statement that doesn't consciously speak about race. However, unconsciously, just underneath the words that she's actually saying, is a feeling that the country has been stolen by a non-white person, and that non-white person who is a thief isn't even born in the United States. I want my country back. It's also unconscious and underneath those exact words that this was a white country to begin with, which is also a lie. Do you see that? So it's not, I'm not capable of just agreeing with your statement because you're blurring those two things apart, which I think is actually giving a benefit to the power of white supremacy when you really have to understand how complicated the language is and the contradictory lessons that are given to white people in white supremacist society.
Oh, I don't want you to agree with anything if you don't think it's accurate. That's the whole purpose of the show. People have disagreements. We chat about it and move forward. So I definitely don't want you to agree with anything if you don't think that that's correct. I will, however, say that I believe a great part of the system of racism, white supremacy, is white people being very skillful with words so that they're never actually saying, Yes, we're practicing racism, we're practicing white supremacy, we're mistreating people because they're not white. It doesn't work that way. The white people who practice racism are always speaking in code, always using terms that sound like, hey, there's no racism. We're about justice. We are about making sure people are not being mistreated. We don't support that at all. The words sound like that, but the end result always results in racism, white supremacy. And when it doesn't, it is an immediate problem. And as I said, the example hood with the neighborhood that you illustrated. People are told we live on the good side of town, where the good schools are. It immediately and consciously becomes a problem when non-white people stumble into that area. For me, the evidence is overwhelming, and it seems to suggest this is not unconscious. We are consciously making decisions based on who is white, who we decide is white, who we decide is not white and eligible to be mistreated. I understand what you're saying. Again, I really want to point out, it's never personal for me as a non-white person. I don't think non-white people function best in countering racism to make it personal, name calling, that sort of thing. It's just business and dealing with it. Even when I have disagreements, even with Tim Wise, it's not personal. It's just business. I suspect he's being deceptive. I suspect he's consciously practicing racism in what he does. Not personal, just business. Even with some of the responses that you've given, I suspect you could consciously be practicing racism, white supremacy. Not personal, just business. Actually, staying in the exact same vein, when you were on the program last month, actually just a couple weeks ago, even though it was last month, you brought up, you said specifically that I had stuff with Tim Wise, and I wanted to bring that up again because a caller mentioned it on the last program, and I don't feel that that is a correct thing to say at all for a myriad of reasons, most important being Tim Wise is an admitted white supremacist. If anyone has stuff, whatever that means, it would be Tim Wise having stuff with me because I am not white. If anything, any white person who says, I am against racism, white supremacy, they should be applauding any non-white person who says, I am suspicious of Tim Wise, especially, or any white person who is doing work where the result is non-white people are not suspicious, non-white people don't think that white person is practicing racism. The result is that non-white people think that is a great white person. Gosh, we cannot be more thankful for what he is doing. Any non-white person who says, oh no, I'm real suspicious of that person, of that white person, I suspect he could be practicing racism. Any white person who says I am against racism, white supremacy should applaud that non-white person for doing the logical thing in a system of white supremacy. And Tim Wise said this on my program. It should never be presented that I have stuff with Tim Wise or any other white person in a system of white supremacy. Do you have a thought on that?
Yes. I think, again, I said on your show as well that it is important to be suspicious of white people because white people have been socialized and are currently working under white supremacy, and that we should all be suspicious of white people, including, as a white person, I should be suspicious of Tim as a white person. And I believe that it is important in order for, even in your chat room, people often ask why a white person would want to replace white supremacy with justice if they get all this good stuff. And if there is a white person who is dismantling racism, challenging white supremacy, and trying to replace it with justice in any way that further motivates more white people to do the same thing, then the same applause that you're talking about, we should be giving them. If Tim Wise's language and experiences motivate me to continually try to replace white supremacy with justice, then his work should also be applauded. And you can be suspicious of it. That's fine. But it's a contradiction that is a truth that must exist. And you don't refer to other people as Elvis. And I understand that that can be sarcastic. I understand it could be a compliment. I understand that it could be a cut down. What I think is interesting, and why I said that last time, was that you bring up Tim Wise a number of points in the last interview, and we are less than an hour in, and you've brought him up in this interview when talking to me. And what is interesting is that in a system of white supremacy, you have two people, me and Tim Wise, as well as others, who have been on your show to talk about the work that they are doing and I am doing to replace white supremacy with justice. And you are able to articulate how that work needs to be questioned and challenged. Motivations, both conscious and subconscious, need to be suspicious, or should have suspicion applied. And we have also said the same thing, but it still comes up with you. So
what still comes up?
That it still comes up as an example.
What, I don't understand. What comes up specifically with me?
Using Tim as an example of what he either said when you support his work or when you use his work as an example of why you need to be suspicious.
Oh, okay. I got you.
It just keeps popping up.
Okay, I understand. I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on what you were saying. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm done.
Oh, okay. I again want to point out. You pointed out, actually, I can use Showing Up White, your report on ways that white people who allege to be against racism, white supremacy, continue to practice racism, white supremacy. You pointed out in that essay that one of the ways these white people continue to practice racism is that they seek accolades for the work that they do. I do not think Tim Wise, you, Robert Jensen, Martin Kevorkian, any of these people should be given accolades. I don't even feel that myself, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller, any other non-white person or white person should be given accolades, whatever that means, until the system of white supremacy has been replaced with justice. You said that, Tim Wise is doing these things to work against racism, white supremacy. The system is still here, which is the point that I pointed out with him on the program. Mm-hmm. There is no one, white or non-white, who can say, I'm doing work that's eroding racism, I should be applauded, or, hey, recognize that I am eroding the system. I'm getting other white people to erode the system. There's nothing you could do to prove that while the system still exists.
Based on that logic, then
wait a minute, you've interrupted me. Whoa.
Yes, I have, because I think what you're saying
Wait a minute, you're interrupting me. This is very important. You're interrupting me. I've been very courteous and allowed you to speak without interrupting. If you don't agree, you can say that, but I would like to finish my point, and then I will let you talk. Thank you.
You may continue. It is your show.
Thank you. As I was saying, Tim Wise agreed with my point. Now, I point out Tim Wise because he is much more well-known than a lot of the other white people who allege to do anti-racist work. I don't think as many people know about yourself or Martin Kevorkian or Robert Jensen. I don't think as many people know about them from my research and talking to different non-white people and even white people. Tim Wise is just much more well known. So he is a better example to use to illustrate my point. And it's not personal. And if anything, everyone should read the emails Mr. Wise sent me before he came on the program. Read those emails and see if this is the behavior and how a white person should sound, and particularly how an alleged anti-racist should be talking to a victim of white supremacy. Read those letters. They're online. The links are posted on the show that he was on. Read those letters and see if this is behavior consistent with a white person who says they are against racism. Please make your point.
My point is, one, I have read the emails, and I think that it is an amazing gift of his time that you are making fun of. That's my language in the 2 emails that he sent you. I think that he is sharing a lot of truths about what it means to be a white man in white supremacist systems. And you talk about them a lot. The other thing that I think is important and why I interrupted you is that what you are saying is that absolutely no form of encouragement should be exchanged while people are doing really challenging work. And I find that disrespectful and unprofessional.
What do you mean? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Even when you started this show, you asked people to click on the heart and favorite it and stuff, because that's how the system at Blog Talk Radio works. And that you've got to have a certain number of downloads and a certain number of listeners and a certain number of favorites so that you can actually get your show out there. Otherwise, you could get your show cut. You may individually lose motivation and you would stop doing your show. The idea that you should not give accolades or encouragement to anyone trying to replace white supremacy with justice, I think is absolutely horrid, which is why it warranted me attempting to interrupt you. The idea that you have, it was a surprise to me, but the idea that you have extended this privilege as a co-host to Justice, most 10-year-olds don't have this opportunity, and it's an incredible privilege that you have extended to Justice. And you asked callers when they call in to say nice things, to welcome Justice into the work. Accolades and encouragement are how we actually support one another in the community, and it is imperative that they exist, regardless of who they come from. Now, if you were questioning the motivations of them, that's something different, but that's not what you clearly articulated in your statement that I interrupted because I found it offensive. If we're talking about Martin Luther King didn't solve racism or classism and has received a few accolades, as has Nelson Mandela, as has Gandhi, as has Mother Teresa, as have a number of people. When you're talking about whites who are working to dismantle white supremacy, part of how white supremacy works is that it suppresses the white role models that other whites could follow to continue in the work. So those of us that are willing to use Noel's language, be race traders and actually work to dismantle white supremacy as white people in our white communities, with our white audiences, etc., it is the accolades and encouragement from other white people that is not related to the racial dynamics that you're addressing that keep people in that process. When you receive accolades and encouragement from non-white people, as we discussed in the last interview, there is a piece of that is very much based on racism. And there can also be a piece of that is very much based on authentic actual connection, and that keeps people doing the work.
May I ask you what you mean when you say accolades, because you use that term. What do you mean when you say accolades?
I mean, whether it is applause, whether it is, I really liked the point that you made here, it really made sense to me, and I'm able to take this work back into my own life. That's what I mean. I think that when you receive something more than just, oh, you did a good job, although that is obviously a form of an accolade, when you were able to make connections with real people and continually motivate them to keep doing work to dismantle white supremacy, regardless of its form, whether it's an email, a Facebook message, a conversation off to the side after a speaking thing, a conversation at an airport, anything like that.
Okay. Well, I'll be clear in what I mean in regards to Tim Wise and any white person and or non-white person. Now, what you just said with accolades, I like that point. I liked what you had to say in that report. If that's what you mean when you say accolades, I have told lots of people, I think everyone that has been on my program, I have pointed out, if they said something that I felt was constructive, if they said something that I felt, hey, I can use this to do attempted counter-racist work, what I'm pointing to specifically is praising, oh, yay, Tim Wise, and I see an overabundance of this amongst non-white people. I see it among white people too, but it really troubles me that I see so much of this amongst non-white people where they think, wow, Tim Wise is incredible. And I think that is totally inappropriate, totally incorrect in a system of white supremacy. No one should generate that. No white person, be very clear, no white person should generate that sort of response from non-white people under the system of white supremacy. And again, Tim Wise pointed this out on my program. I, in fact, find it fascinating that an admitted racist white supremacist would be offended that my view is that no white person should be praised, no white person, we should be celebrating what they're doing as long as this system is in effect, that you would take that much offense to it, especially since you have written in your report that this is one of the ways white people practice racism, seeking praise and applause specifically from non-white people. What I see with Tim Wise is exactly, almost verbatim, what you have written in your report. And you sound personally troubled about this, which to me is fascinating. I suspect this could be racism, white supremacy, especially since I am a victim. I am mistreated daily because I am not white, and specifically because I am a black person, and I'm not jumping up and down, personally offended by the myriad of abuses that I have to tolerate every day, including receiving letters from Tim Wise that I did not feel were constructive and that I did not feel supported a non-white person being suspicious of him. In fact, I would encourage everyone listening, look at those letters and then listen to the program and see if he sounded the same on the program, if his tone sounded the same on the program as it did in those letters. And if you think there's a difference, question, why would he sound that way in a private letter to me? Why would he not take that same tone on the program? When he was on the program, he encouraged non-white people to be suspicious even of him. Why does his tone sound different in the letter? I would encourage everyone listening to review those. I will even give you the final word if you would like to make a comment on what I just said.
I think we're just going to agree to disagree. Okay. Justice, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Earlier, you guys were talking about, like, I think segregation I have a question. What is segregation?
Do you want me to answer that, Gus, or do you want to answer what segregation is?
You use the term, so that would be you. If I'm correct, if I'm incorrect, let me know. But I believe you use that term because that's a term I generally do not use. I believe you brought that up when we were talking about white people making distinctions between white and non-white. If I'm incorrect,
no, I know I used the term. I just didn't know if you wanted to explain how the term is used or what it means to your co-host.
No, ma'am. That one's you.
All right, Justice. So I used the term segregation. In the sense of keeping people from different racial groups separate. So, like, there would be a white neighborhood, and usually based on how streets or highways or railroads are laid out in a town, it's pretty common that, like, white people would live on one side of the railroad tracks, and non-white people would live on the other side of the railroad tracks, making the town segregated in that each race has its own little special place where you would need to live.
Mm-hmm.
You're in this.
I had another question, too.
Uh-huh.
When you were talking about Martin Luther King Jr.,
yes.
What is classism?
Classism, towards the end of Martin Luther King's life, he began to focus on how much people got paid based on how much work they were doing, and found that there was a lot of inequality amongst pay as well as benefits. In this sense, I mean benefits like whether they had insurance or vacation, things like that. And so when Martin Luther King was actually assassinated, when he was killed, he was doing work around class issues or the income or pay that people make and how those things are very different, and how that is also connected to race. So he started doing more work in those particular areas, which I believe actually got the attention of what I would call leaders of the country at the time, because in a white supremacist society, it's a lot easier for white people to see racism as a problem that only non-white people have to deal with. But as soon as you start talking about how much you're actually paying someone for work, that becomes a problem of people that would be defined as white people as well. And I think there was too much to potentially lose by the people who were in power at the time. And I think that's why Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Okay. And I'll think of some more questions.
Right.
I don't have any more right now.
Okie dokie. I wanted to, we're about to take a couple callers as well. I want to make sure I shoot them the number so that you can call in if you are listening to the program, 347-215-6071. I'm about to hit the phone lines. Give me one hot second.
Can I add something before we get a caller?
I'm not going to the phone lines just yet. I had a couple more questions. Actually, I'll finish my question and then you can go. Yeah, I would appreciate that. My question I wanted to point before we squash the Tim Wise discussion. I think for me, this is a great illustration of why this is not personal, because I believe you have, and I could be incorrect, I believe there's something personal in terms of the respect that you have for Tim Wise's work and how that has motivated you to do your work. I believe you said you've met him personally. You all have talked. If I'm incorrect, please correct me on that. But I believe you said before that you spoke with Tim Wise. Mm-hmm. You've met him personally, and I believe that it might be personal there. And I think it's best I think this illustrates why I think it's more effective to do this from a business standpoint, because in my view, as long as the system of white supremacy exists, the easy answer, nothing else need be said, any non-white person who takes the stance, I am suspicious of all white people. I don't care what they are doing. I don't care what they say, how many books they write, how much money they give to non-white people. I'm suspicious until the system of white supremacy has been replaced with justice, period. Any non-white person who takes that stance, there should be nothing said but that is totally logical, period. I wouldn't care if they took that stance about John Brown. I wouldn't care if they took that stance about Tim Wise. I wouldn't care if they took that stance about Jessica Pettitt, all three and twice on Sunday. That is the logical stance to take. And for you to, and you said it, you said you felt offended about my views on Mr. Wise, which he came on my program and said are completely logical. This is why it needs to be all business, because when it becomes personal, now we're opening up the door for non-white people, in my view, to be mistreated. There's no reason, none at all, for me to, yay, Tim Wise, he's doing great work. Not at all, especially after the mail that he sent me, and particularly, even if he hadn't sent me that, just based on seeing him in person and seeing the way non-white people respond to him. I saw the very thing that he said troubles him most, where non-white people are not suspicious. I saw an entire congregation of white and non-white people where no one was suspicious of him. I saw the exact thing that he said troubles him most. I feel he is one of the best illustrations, because people know Tim Wise. He's one of the best illustrations of how white people who allege to be against racism can be devastatingly effective at practicing refined white supremacy. I would like to end the discussion of Tim Wise on that, so that that point is not lost, because I don't think I said anything you can disagree with, and if you listen to the Tim Wise show, he co-signs on everything I just said. Make the comment that you were going to make before that, please, Ms. Pettitt.
What I was going to say is that just because I know someone personally doesn't mean that my response is somehow personal. Racism is very personal to me, and when I'm working with racism, that doesn't mean that I'm being irrational. I think that it is important to state that I wasn't offended about your comments about Tim Wise. I was offended that you said that no accolades or encouragement should be given until the system is completely dismantled.
I didn't say encouragement. You want to be clear about words. I didn't say encouragement.
You said the word accolade because I had used that word.
I didn't say encouragement.
I am adding the word encouragement in because you've asked me to make sure my vocabulary is accessible. I'm using them as synonyms. I think that it is, what was offensive was that you have this power to be able to tell your audience not to give any kind of accolades, I'm using the word encouragement, any of those kind of things until the system is completely dismantled, then I don't believe that the system will actually be dismantled. Because people need encouragement in order to feel like they're doing something right.
I did not say do not encourage anyone to replace white supremacy with justice. I want to be very clear about that. Anyone who has confusion around that, you can rewind the broadcast. I never said that. I want to be very clear. Everyone, if you can tell someone else about racism, white supremacy, that's what I'm doing with my program here. I believe that's what you're doing with your work, right. Jess. That's what you're doing.
And you even
oh, wait a minute, I'm not done. I'm not done.
You're
interrupting. You're interrupting. That's what we're both doing with our work, is to try to get other people to be informed about this so that, hey, we get more people working to replace white supremacy with justice. The whole crux about this is that I have observed non-white people, especially, and some white people, but a lot of non-white people get into celebrating if they see one white person who looks like they might be doing something against racism, or even a non-white person. And I don't think that's constructive. We have a lot of work to do. Every white person who has come on this show has said, except for Dr. O'Reilly, he didn't say it, but every white person other than that has said they don't really see any evidence that white people are going to stop practicing racism, white supremacy. That being the case, we got a lot of work to do. We do not have time to sit around and jump up and down and yell and praise Tim Wise or Neely Fuller or Dr. Welsing. If this problem is going to be solved, the best counter-racists have not even stepped on the floor work. So we would all be well served to continue our work, keep going. If somebody does something you think is constructive, you can point that out. Your term, encourage. I never said don't encourage anyone. Do that. Just make sure that we're not stopping to pat people on the back and jump up and down and praise anybody and worship them, particularly if it is a white person. Really, really.
I think that you're actually backstepping a little. Even in reading Showing Up White, you offer to me that it is constructive. And you use the term constructive a lot, from my perception, to validate that somebody's doing something good. I am not differentiating between the levels of standing ovations versus this is constructive. The reason why I went to interrupt you was because how I heard you, because I'm listening to you, how I heard you is that none of that was appropriate until it was dismantled. And that's the reason I attempted to interrupt you. If you are saying now that if you see somebody doing something, to use your word, that is constructive, then please tell them, but you don't have to jump around and make a big deal out of it because we have a lot of work to do. I 100% support you in that statement. But that is not what I heard earlier, which is why I attempted to interrupt you.
Perhaps it would have been best for you to clarify what I was saying, especially since you said I said don't encourage anyone when I never said the word encourage, and you used the term accolade. Maybe it would have been best if you had sought clarity with regards to what I was saying. I could be incorrect. As you pointed out, I have told a lot of people who have been on my show, I think this is constructive, what you just said or what you wrote. I said your report, very constructive. I still suspect you practice racism, white supremacy in many ways, probably have done so on this program today. I suspect you will continue to do so after the program is over and, however long you're here.
And I don't disagree with that.
Beautiful. But I will point out, I do think this right here is constructive. I never said that is incorrect or that you shouldn't point out if something is constructive, something that you think you can use to replace white supremacy with justice, or just use in a manner that will be beneficial to yourself, someone else, and not cause harm. I never said that. I was just saying, and maybe I'll make an effort to clarify. What I'm saying is no one should be praised, especially not white people. No one should we be jumping up and down to say, oh, this person is doing wonderful work dismantling No. I said Jessica Pettitt wrote a very constructive report, Showing Up White. It's linked in the show. You can see it in the description. I think it's constructive. Non-white people, you should check it out. That's about the extent of encouragement, to use your term, accolades, to use your term. That would be about the extent of what I would have to say about what you said.
What word would you prefer to use, since you don't like accolade or encouragement?
That report is constructive. That report has excellent information that I think non-white people.
Okay, what are those called? Are they called compliments? Like what? I want your words so that I'm not putting words in your mouth. So when you give someone that kind of feedback, is it feedback? Is it a compliment? What is that? You can
just let the person know what you did.
What is that called? Is what I'm trying to find out. So like constructive would fit under the category that I would call accolade or encouragement. You don't like those words. I don't want to use my words in place of your words. What word would you use?
I would simply say I'm giving feedback. We can use that. I'm giving feedback. I'm letting you know this, I think, is constructive. What you said, what you wrote, whatever the person did, this is constructive, and this is why. This is specifically why I think it's constructive. That's what I would do. That's what I tell people if it's back of the bus, if it's you. I said Tim Wise. He said constructive things on the program. I pointed that out.
That's fine. I wasn't looking for the content of the praise or the content of the feedback. I was looking for the word feedback so that I can use your word. Justice, you sounded like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you mean by encourage and the other?
Accolade?
Yeah.
Accolade.
So that's what I was just attempting to clarify or to make a little bit more sense. So I would use the word accolade or encouragement in telling somebody they've done a good job. So Gus is saying that he would use the word feedback, and that the idea is that, like, when you are in a particular situation or you have written something or you have said something, that then there's the opportunity for someone else to say, good job, or no, I didn't like that so much. So I'm using encouragement or accolade as the more positive side, the smiley faces versus the frowny faces.
So are those two words the same meaning, or are they different?
I think that in this setting they mean about the same thing. Feedback, encouragement, and accolade.
Okay.
So like if I was texting you, I could give you a little smiley face.
Mhm.
Very interesting. This will be very interesting to play back and listen to, because this might be another nice illustration of the importance of words, because I believe Jess used both of those terms, accolades and encouragement. I don't think I had said either of those two terms when I made my statements about Mr. Wise. That would be very interesting to go back and look at how all that played out around those two words that I never used. At any rate, I
am the originator of the word accolade and encouragement. So I don't know what point that's making, but yes, I'm the one who said those words. I think at one point you used the word accolade when you were quoting me. I think you're more likely to use the word praise or feedback. I don't know why this would be interesting, but yes, let's go back through.
Words are always very interesting to me, particularly since I think that was an interesting moment. I will definitely be interested in hearing that, how all that played out, and if all of that could have been squashed initially, just getting clarity around what I said, and particularly not inserting those two words in the discussion, accolades and encouragement, since I didn't use those terms. I'm going to check the phone line to see if we have callers. Number again, 347-215-6071. Before I go to the phone lines, Justice, do you have another question and or comments that you would like to make?
Yes, I would.
I'm sorry?
What?
Oh.
Yeah, I would. What, in the term of praise, what do you mean by praise?
I mean it in the same way as before, that if somebody says something that you like, you would say, I really like what you said. If you read something somebody wrote, you would say, I really like what you read, or what I read that you wrote. That's what I mean by praise. And that the person who said it or wrote it can then feel excited about continuing on to do the work.
Okay. I don't have anything else right now.
Am I interrupting?
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. We have two callers on the line just now. If you called in, because there are some people who called in, but they do not have a hand raised. If you want to ask a question or chat or anything, press 1 so that I'll see the hand, and then I can put you on the line. We have two callers. 301. Are you there?
Yes.
Feel free. Ask your. Wait a minute. Justice, she pointed this out earlier. She wanted to know the callers, are they going to be white or non-white? So 301, are you a white person or a non-white person?
Non-white person.
Oh, this is Mr. Hill, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, right on. Rocket, thank you for supporting. Shoot your question, comment, please, sir.
The question I had from Ms. Pettitt was, I didn't understand why you was getting so upset. Well, the question I have is, do you feel as though that your upsetness, was you upset? First of all, was you upset?
I think I would use the word frustrated more than upset.
Okay. And my second question would be, is the upsetness because of the white supremacy and racism, or is it upset directed at Gus?
What I'm frustrated about is how complicated white supremacy is and how challenging it is to be able to say what it is white supremacy has taught me and what it is I'm trying to replace with justice, and be able to do it in a way that everyone can understand, and it points out the contradictions.
Okay.
And it's very, very, very hard to do. That's what I'm frustrated about.
I have one more question, if I can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you see yourself, and how would you classify yourself if you were to say, if you were to classify yourself in the system of white supremacy? How would you classify yourself?
I don't know if I understand your question. I'm white.
Well,
is that what you mean?
Well, like, you made the comment of saying, well, Gus T Renegade has a lot of power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you classify yourself as a person who's an operator, meaning who has control? I mean, operator means someone has control over you, or are you an owner, you have control over everybody? And what that means to me, like, you have a lot of power to influence white people, correct?
In theory, yes.
Okay. Now, as a person who has the power to influence other white people, how do you see yourself using the power?
I feel that I use my power to influence other white people by working directly with primarily white audiences, writing articles that white people tend to read, having conversations with white colleagues, friends, community members, family members in primarily white neighborhoods, etc., trying to help people begin to understand what it is they have been unconscious to. That's kind of step one. And once I then have worked with people, including myself, once I realize that I have a race and that race isn't somebody else's problem to deal with, that I have one and it's a problem I need to deal with, because the way that racism works is that I actually have the power in the dominant position of white supremacy. So once I've realized that I am racist and that I am complicit in a white system, I then have a responsibility to monitor my own actions or inactions, behaviors, emotions, things like that, and change my own patterns of way of being, as well as role model it for other white people.
Okay. Gus? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Question. It was a question you said about, I think the gentleman asked you, how did you feel about when you feel icky and you have to sit inside your feelings? And I think you made the descriptions as a slave master on top of a porch, and I can't remember. Hello?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
I know I was talking to Ms. Pettitt.
Sorry.
Yes, the last interview I talked about how I hadn't ever actually said it before the radio show, but it kind of came to me at the moment that if we use the slave-master metaphor, that as the slave master, I'm sitting on my porch and have created this system of enslavement and have done such a good job of creating the system that even the slaves will come up to me at the porch and thank me for being part of the system.
And you said you had to sit in those feelings and feel those feelings. And I wanted to comment on that, and I wanted to say is this. I really don't really care about how white people, feel. I just don't want them to act on their feelings. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying?
I guess I'll ask you to clarify.
What I mean by, let's say your feelings towards, let's say, for instance, you all of a sudden have a feeling that you don't like black people, right? And you started to act on that feeling by taking a gun and shooting someone black. Hello?
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is this, is that I always say to people, I can't argue with your feelings, but I can talk to your logic. And my understanding is this, I don't really care about how white people feel as far as about black people. How do you get white people not to act on their feelings to attack black people in your work?
First, I think you have to make myself and other white people, we have to realize we have those feelings. I think that acting, to use the example you used, to act on your feelings of racism, I think it's harmful to ignore a non-white person or stand in front of a non-white person in line, get served first, or things like that. I think that that's also harmful. You don't have to pull out a gun and actually start killing non-white people in order to be acting on your feelings.
Yeah, I'm sorry to use that dramatic statement.
No, but I think it's important for anybody, white or non-white, listening, that whether someone actually has a gun or not, that it's still very harmful for someone to act in a racist way. It doesn't actually have to result in a gun and death for harm to be committed. So I think that you're actually making a good point.
And the reason why, the reason why I brought up that point was the guy getting killed at the Holocaust Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can tell, here's a guy whose feelings about inadequacy or whatever you have takes those actions and acts them out and kills a black person. And what I'm coming to understand is that it's, to me, it's more of a thing on where people act upon their feelings and can get away with act upon their feelings and say, okay, it's okay to kill a person who's black.
So, you asked me a question a minute ago, and then I think you just kind of alluded to another question. So I want to make sure that I'm.
No, what I'm saying is that particular system. That particular thing, like how do you get into a white person's psyche and understand their actions towards somebody that have any irrational thought as far as their action towards black people?
I first have to realize that I do it and that I'm part of it, and then I externally talk about the dialogue that happens inside of my head so that it can go from unconscious to actually out loud and use it as a role model for other white people to see what kind of frameworks are in my head. In my audiences, I actually have a lot. I find very effective in helping white people to see what frameworks exist in their consciousness. I have a lot of interactive activities where they are forced to begin to see the participants as they are forced to be able to see the judgments and assumptions that they do make. And that's the beginning of the dialogue, is even realizing, for white people to even realize that they are making judgments and assumptions, let alone acting on them. It's the first starting point.
One more question. So where does those feelings come from? I mean,
I wanted to 720. Are you on the line?
I'm here.
Oh, right on. Feel free. Ask your question, sir.
So actually, the first person just asked another question.
Oh, we have a bunch of callers. Can we hold that one question so that way I can make sure that we snatch everyone?
Well, actually, you can. The only question I wanted to know where does it. Well, hello.
The answer is white supremacy. That's where the frameworks come from.
What that thought processing comes from white supremacy?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, Gus. I just wanted to ask those couple of questions.
Yeah, you can hang tight. I just want to make sure I get everybody in so that nobody feels left out. 720, are you there?
Yes. I have some comments that I'd like to make. Hopefully I can make them quickly. It's with greater sadness in my heart after hearing justice that I say to both of you. Hotep, victims of white people who work to maintain the system of white supremacy. It is with greater sadness in my heart that I say that. I didn't quite understand what you said the last show, Gus, when Cree 7 was on your show, and Cree had said that you burst her bubble when you said, I suspect that she's already been a victim of white supremacy, meaning justice.
Yes, sir.
As I say, it's with greater sadness in my heart that I say Hotep to the both of you.
For sure.
Yes, that's the first thing. The second thing is, I'd like to let Lady Cree know that I called at least 7 times to comment and ask questions and give feedback on the female victim show. But
last show?
Yes.
The last show that we did last week?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, but I was told the show was full. It sounded awful suspicious, but at any rate, I wanted Lady Cree to know that I, being a male victim of white people who work, I don't see them practicing anything, they're experts at it, who work to maintain the system of white supremacy. I called to let her know that I wanted to give her feedback on the show, since she seemed to have concerns that male victims weren't taking her seriously. I wanted her to know that I found what she had to say to be extremely constructive and fascinating. Also, being a lady and a female victim of white people who work to maintain the system of white supremacy, I want her to know that I find that there is no male who can say it in the way that she said it. Anyway, I did find what she had to say to be extremely productive, extremely interesting. And as I said, she could say it like no male can or ever will. And from the bottom of my heart, Lady Cree, I thank you for all that you do in combating and trying to eliminate this cursed system that white folks work to maintain, called white supremacy. Another comment I have for you, victim. I said to you that I suspected you didn't clear up anything in Mrs. Pettit's mind, which is what I didn't add on last time, when you said, oh, no, let me clear this up. And I no longer need to suspect, as she has confirmed it during the course of this conversation, when she said to you, essentially, that you two can agree to disagree. So she has confirmed that you have cleared nothing up in her mind in terms of Mr. Wise's stuff with you. The other comment I have to make is that it's very interesting, the last talk with Miss Biss, I said to her how confusing her word usage is. And once again, I find, as Mr. Sekou Nkrumah had written, that the actions of our friends and allies speak louder than the yakety-yak-yak of their empty words of commitment as they speak out of both sides of their neck. For Mrs. Pettitt, I have a couple questions. Let me take a minute so that I can try and be clear. I am retarded. I am a victim of white people who work to maintain the system of white supremacy. So
I am retarded too, sir. I can relate.
I'm sorry?
I said I am retarded too, sir. I can relate.
Okay, let me take a moment to see if I can try to be somewhat clear. On one of your shows where you were at the home of some anti-racist, and one of the young ladies had said, she continually kept saying how white people benefit in the system of white supremacy. They benefit. And I asked the woman on that show if she would stop saying that and tell the whole truth and let victims know, because coming from a white person's mouth, it might be more truthful or make more sense to us victims, since we seem to hold white people as gods, hold them up as gods. But I asked the white woman if she would say the whole truth and say that they benefit by abusing and mistreating non-white victims. That is how they benefit. And once again, I find another, well, I don't need to say suspected white supremacist. She is an admitted white supremacist. That as opposed to saying how they abuse and mistreat to benefit, they simply want to say, we benefit. That could mean anything and it can confuse victims into thinking, well, we benefit too, so what's the big deal? What's the big deal? People benefit, so what? Now, as concerns that, I've been talking with other victims of white people who work to maintain the system of white supremacy. What I find is, being they don't understand what white supremacy is and how it works, and neither do I, I'm trying to. But what I find is they always end up defending white people, white supremacists. They defend them tooth and nail, I would say, because they see no problem with them benefiting. So what I'd like to ask Ms. Pettitt is if she could say to the victims, because let me make this clearer, the victims seem to think that the only white people that are white supremacists are the ones who are straight up bloodthirsty, murderous, savage, psychopathic, or they're committing psychopathic acts of madness and violence. Those are the only people that the non-white victims I encounter consider to be white supremacists, and that is the only way they see a white supremacist. So that all the other white people are quickly cleared, pardoned, and proved innocent of any wrongdoing or being white supremacists. So if Mrs. Pettitt could give as many examples of how, and I would find this, since you seem to need this, Mrs. Pettitt, I would find this to be extremely constructive. If you could begin to tell us the many, many, many ways that white people who who work to maintain the system of white supremacy do so and are injurious and abusive on a day-to-day basis without being straight up psychopathically savage and violent. To you, dear Justice, let me try to explain what I mean by that and give you an explanation before hopefully Ms. Pettitt will answer the question. What I mean by, and I'm just going to use a few words, dear heart. What I mean by psychopathic is that they're crazy. They're just straight up crazy. What I mean by savage is like if a crazy dog were to bite you and just bite you and bite you and bite you and try and take your hands off. That's what I mean by savage, okay? The other thing I would like to say to you, Justice, concerns, and I'm sorry to take up so much time. I know that you have lots of callers, victim, but I suspect that perhaps I wanted to give a go at trying to clear up when Mrs. Pettitt said benefit. So I look at it like this. Justice, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Have you ever eaten any candy or ice cream?
Yep.
You have?
Yes,
okay, did you work to get the candy or ice cream, or did your mother and father work to get it for you?
I worked to get it.
Okay, good.
Candy and ice cream.
Good. If you work to get it, well, this is what happens when white people benefit. And I want you to try to understand this. If I'm not clear, you tell me. And here's a good way to do. Maybe you could repeat back what I'm saying to you, okay? Once I finish. Mm-hmm. Here's what happens. White people benefit like this. If you work to get the candy, then they can take the candy for free. And that's how they benefit. They get the candy for free that you worked for. Now, here's the other thing. They can take it from you, and they can do anything they want to take it from you for free when you worked for it. That's how they benefit. They get your candy that you worked for free. They benefit. And they can do anything that they want to hurt you to take it from you. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand, but I don't understand if it's a white person or is it a non-white person.
If they are working to maintain white supremacy, white people, then they can take the candy from the non-white person for free. They get it by not doing any work at all. They don't have to do anything except take your candy. Take the candy from the non-white person. And they can do anything they want to take that candy from you, no matter how much it hurts you, the non-white person. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand it.
Okay, can you say back to me what you understand?
I understand that
okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you work for the candy or ice cream, then white people can take it all because you're a non-white person.
That's right. They can take it for free. You work for it, but they can take it for free. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
May I add something that I think is good for the ice cream candy example?
You are an admitted white supremacist, free and 21.
I don't know what 3 and 21 means.
You can say what you want.
I would add to that not only as a white person can I take the ice cream and the candy that you've worked really hard for, but I actually expect that you would just give it to me. I think that that's how white supremacy works, is that I would expect that you just give me your ice cream, that I don't even have to ask for it. And I also have gallons and gallons and gallons of every flavor of ice cream in my refrigerator and still expect for you to just give me yours.
I wanted to hop in, 720. I want her to get your question. There was a caller from 424. They called in. I wanted to make sure they got an opportunity to ask their question. Are you there, 424? Might have lost them. I will double check. I guess that would go back to you, Jess, if you'd like to respond. He had a question. I don't know. He might need to re-ask his question for you to be able to respond. The question that 720 had.
I'm uncertain as to which question I'm answering.
Me too. That's why I said he might need to restate his question so that you can answer. But I did hear that he had a question for you. Oh, it was. Oh, yeah. You can say it. Go ahead, sir.
I'll try and be brief with it again, victim. All of the non-white victims that I speak with about white people who work to maintain the system of white supremacy are very confused about what exactly a white supremacist is. What they all say down to the letter, that a white supremacist is a white person who is a straight-up, bloodthirsty, murderous, savage, psychopathic killer who commits acts of madness and violence upon non-white victims of white supremacists. That is the only way that they see someone who is a white supremacist.
Right. I'm remembering now.
Okay, so. And
I didn't mean to cut you off. I just remembered the question that you had talked about.
You remember what I was asking you to do that would, I know for myself, would be most constructive for myself and other non-white victims.
Yes. So I think it was the first caller's question, I attempted to even start addressing this. So I think it's very important that in order to be a racist and a supporter of white supremacy, you do not have to be in the KKK, you do not have to burn crosses, you do not have to have a gun and kill black people. You can be a racist and a white supremacist just by being a white person who grew up in a white supremacist system. I am a racist. I support white supremacy by virtue of being white in this system. I have never been to a KKK meeting. I have never burned a cross. I don't even own a gun. I am a racist, and it's something that I have to work on to dismantle white supremacy and replace it with justice. The piece that gets to your question specifically that I think is important, that also ties back into the conversation we were having, is that I think part of white supremacy convinces white people that you have to be this. Hello?
Oh, we can hear you, sir. Hold on one second.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I was in.
Yes, sir.
I think that part of white supremacy teaches white people that they have to do these extreme, to use your word, savage behaviors in order to be racist. So as long as they're not doing those, then somehow they're not racist. I think that's how white supremacy stays in place. In an interview that, Gus, you did in the past, there was actual percentages given as a guesstimate of the idea that, let's say, 20% of people, actually, I did that wrong. It's 10% of people would be like KKK members, David Duke, burning crosses, killing people, things like that. Then the example that was given that I support as well is that there's another 10% of people who I would like to think I fit into that category, where I acknowledge that I am white, I recognize that I benefit from white supremacy, and I acknowledge that I am a racist, and that is also a very small percentage of white people. So that leaves 80% of white people to be completely oblivious, which is why some of the questions are harder to answer, because they're being addressed directly to people doing anti-racist work and trying to dismantle white supremacy, and those people are also representative of the other whites that make up the white group. Does that help?
No. Let me say what I was asking for again. To give it to you straight up with no chaser. The non-white victims that I speak with say that the only people that can be white people that can be white supremacists are the ones who commit these injurious and murderous acts, harmful, violent acts, abusive, misuse, mistreating acts. So I asked if you could be constructive and tell us on a day-to-day basis how, other than that, other than stringing up black males on black telephone poles and castrating them while burning them to death, other than doing something that overt, what are the many ways that white people commit injurious and abusive acts on a day-to-day level, on a day-to-day basis, without being that overt, so that other non-white victims can hear straight from an admitted racist mouth how you are how you are a white supremacist on a day-to-day basis. I think that would be extremely constructive.
You're correct that there are millions of ways, so I don't know which one.
If you can say there are any of them, you start wherever you please, as I'm sure you will.
Hello?
Yes, I'm still here, sir.
Part of racism is not acknowledging.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It would be more constructive if you would say part of being a white supremacist. It would be more constructive. To say racism, that's confusing, as there are millions of ways that can be used.
Part of the way I was using your language, part of the way that I support and continue white supremacy, is that better?
No. Part of the way of being a white supremacist.
Okay, I'm really trying to answer your question. I've already said that I am a white supremacist. I've already said I'm a racist. I'm trying to answer your question in ways that I support white supremacy. I am a white supremacist. How I am a racist, whichever language you would like to use there.
Mrs. Pettitt, you asked me if that would be better. I said no. It would be better.
So I changed my language, and now I'm using your word. As a white supremacist, I don't have to think about the land I grew up on that was stolen. I don't have to think about the land I'm sitting on right now that is stolen. I don't have to think about the people who didn't get into the college that I got into because I got into it. I don't have to think about the people who are non-white who have applied for apartments that would have credit checks and then be denied, and I never even had my credit checked. I don't have to think about the people who don't get jobs when I automatically get them because I know people. I don't have to think about that. That's how.
Mrs. Pettitt, can you tell the non-white victims how that is injurious and harmful to them?
Because I don't even have to acknowledge that they exist. And how white supremacy works. They don't exist. How much more harm can you get? In a white supremacist society, and as a white supremacist, I don't even have to acknowledge that somebody else lives, let alone that I'm getting stuff instead of them. And I am given encouragement, accolades, feedback, and praise from white supremacy. The more I don't recognize that I'm taking these things and opportunities from other people. I don't know what's more harmful than that.
I wanted to point out, 720, you can hang for 1 second. 301, I'm going to get your question. There was a person in the chat room, Justice X, listening in from Austria. Her question was, earlier in the program, when we were talking about the whole C.O.W.S issue, you said that the work that you do to combat racism is personal for you. That was your statement, Jess. The Justice X, she's a non-white female. She wanted to know if you could explain what you mean when you say racism is personal to you as an admitted racist white supremacist. If you could explain that with as much detail and clarity as possible.
It ties into what I just said to the last caller's question, in that if I don't make this personal, then it just becomes business. And the way that my business works is to not pay attention, not see, not think, and just blindly wield my power about, and nothing will ever sign off a siren, no lights will flash or anything that I'm doing anything wrong. I have to make this personal.
What is, I guess it would help clarify, what do you mean when you say personal? That would help.
It is about me, it is about my emotions, it is about my actions, it's about my behaviors, it's about my inactions. It is absolutely, positively personal. It's something that I have to consciously choose to pay attention to. It is not just everyday business.
Hello?
Oh, I want to get to you, 301. I think I just want to clarify for myself here. As a victim of white supremacy, what it sounds like is that the system of white supremacy is personal for you because you are a part of that system. Would that be correct?
Of course.
Okay, so this is important, I think. This is very important for white people, regardless whether they're doing anti-racist work or not, whether they're just regular white people who are practicing racism. I think this is very important. As a non-white person, if you begin doing the work of attempting to do the work of replacing white supremacy with justice, as Ms. Pettitt said on the last show, if the system of white supremacy was removed, she said she would feel that she was in free fall, that everything about her life, the structure for it, had been removed if there was no more racism, white supremacy. Non-white people, if you're doing work against racism, white supremacy, white people are going to take it very personal when you do this work. You should expect that. My suggestion would be make it very clear. I understand this is going to be personal for you. This is not personal for me. This is business. This is what I should be doing. I expect that you will have personal responses to things. I would even suggest if you see a white person taking it personal, what you're doing could be constructive. That might be a sign that you're on the correct path if white people are getting personally offended by things that you're doing to replace white supremacy with justice. Do you think that sounds logical, Jess?
I think that is white supremacy. And that if I, as a white person, didn't take this personally, then I wouldn't actually be doing the work. And you, as a non-white person, this is your every fucking day. Like, this is
we got 10-year-olds. You got to watch that. This
is a hobby. Like, as a white supremacist, I don't have to do anything that I'm choosing to do. As a non-white person in a system of white supremacy, this is how you stay alive. So unfortunately, that's every single day for you. That's the water in your fishbowl. So of course it's business as usual because it's what you have to deal with every single day. As a white person, the every single day business stuff is that 80% that's not thinking about this. That's why it's personal. It's not that you've uncovered some kind of route or secret, like an escape route or something. It's that I don't have to be doing this. I would get more benefits if I didn't do it. According to the white supremacy system, I would be rewarded to support oppression of non-white people. I don't want to do that. That's why it has to be personal for me.
Very interesting. 301, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Go ahead, sir.
This is me again. I wanted to ask you a question. Are you a sports fan or anything like that?
Moderately. I grew up in Texas, so high school football, college football is kind of a religion.
Okay. Are you a dog lover?
I'm sorry?
Are you a dog lover? I mean, do you have dogs as pets?
Yes, I have 2 dogs.
Yes. I wanted to ask you a situation on the Michael Vick situation. A specific question. Do you think that the stuff he's going through is racist, or do you think that it's just?
What is he going through?
You haven't heard?
Wait, I just don't understand what your question is.
My question to you is
You mean like being made an example of? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yes, I think that it's insane, and I think it's racist.
What part do you find of the situation as racist, since you are a person who has dogs?
Okay. Number one, I think harming any animal, regardless of your race, I think is a horrendous crime. The fact that Michael Vick is a sports hero and makes a lot of money and can be made a good example of is how the media was portraying that, and that you're not supposed to do this to animals. I think that is how the media spend it, and when I said media, I think the media is very much controlled by white supremacy. I think that the fact that there are thousands, I'm guessing, of white people who torture animals on a regular basis, some of which even put the videos up on YouTube, and it's never, ever questioned. No one's arrested, no one's made an example of, etc. That's racism. I just learned about something on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. It's called Crush, and it's like white, middle-class looking housewives who crush kittens with their like Chanel little slippered feet, and it's on YouTube. And that's funny and entertainment to people. And even for some people it's sick and gross and should be banned from YouTube, but those people are not being arrested. That's called racism. If you go from dogs to pot use, it's far more likely to find pot or marijuana or some kind of paraphernalia on a white person than on a person of color. So when racial profiling happens by police officers, it always goes to non-whites.
And the reason why I asked that, I knew that...
That's racism.
Right. The reason why I asked that, because I think the last time we was talking to you, you had like dogs in the background.
I have 2 dogs, yes.
Right, 2 dogs. Do you think that the situation with Michael Vick and the dog fighting, do you think that stems from racism itself, meaning that even fighting the dogs?
I don't know enough about Michael Vick or his motivations. I mean, I feel like you're kind of potentially looking to, did he need some kind of outlet for his frustration or aggression? Like some would argue lifting weights and playing sports would do that, but obviously that wasn't enough.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, my question, the reason why I posed that question, the thing I couldn't understand about white people is that you all started dog fighting. So why is it a crime like for me, I don't get the oppression about dogs in America. Why is it so a thing with dogs or just animals in general, where we pick and choose which animals that are livestock and which animals that we can keep around as pets? What is the fascination with dogs and white people, or just animals in general?
So, on one level, I want to say I have no idea.
Okay.
And the second level, I want to say that just like what comes up for me kind of immediately is, I mean, even how animal fighting or whatever probably originated was the ability to control something else or to have some other live entertainment at your disposal. I think dogs have experienced this. I think domesticated animals have experienced this. I think slaves have experienced this. I think non-white people have experienced this. I think women have experienced this. I think children have experienced this. I think that even like if you take Wall Street as a person, how it looks at other corporations, it's the same thing of like, how can you control another living thing and use it for your own entertainment or own domesticated purposes? And then we eventually discovered how you could make money off of it. So then another living person became a labor commodity. I think that that's how white supremacy functions. We talked about that the last show when we talked about militarism and genocide and terrorism and colonization, that is a significant piece of how white supremacy was developed, was created, and stays in place.
Okay, and that's the reason why I was trying to, the point you just made is the thing about control. Am I correct?
Sure. The control, and I would also say being able to determine what's disposable. I think that's part of privilege, too.
The Justice X, she's in the chat room. She said, she asked the previous question about the business of going about countering racism is personal for you. She said that when you started talking about it being a hobby, for you doing this work as a hobby, she said that was confusing for her. And she said, well, I kind of already have the answer, but she said that what do you expect from non-white people in regards to you doing this work? Do you expect non-white people to thank you? That was her question.
Yeah, I saw that question in the chat room, and I responded that you aren't supposed to do anything.
Who, the non-white people or the white people?
Non-white people. I realize I have a typo. I didn't say NT. That's important. And when she specifically asked, so are we supposed to thank her? I have no expectations on non-white people dismantling white supremacy. When we talked about this the last interview as well, that I believe that you have to come at systems of oppression from your dominant identities. So I don't think that non-white people will be very successful in getting white people to understand how they have a race, they are racist, and that they are complicit in white supremacy, because I think by virtue of racism, they will be dismissed by white people. Yeah, which is why I stated last interview that I think you have to do the work from your dominant identities. So men would do it from a place of being a man. People who are of the right age could do it around age. U.S. citizens could do it. Like all of the different privileged identities that exist, from those dominant places you could do work. So if I have an expectation at all, it's that people would find their dominant identities that they're comfortable doing work in and do it.
Mm-hmm. And I want to be clear, you said you did not have an expectation that non-white people would thank you or be appreciative for you doing this work. Is that correct?
It's not an expectation, no.
Okay.
I feel like this is my responsibility.
Okay.
I mean, that doesn't mean it doesn't feel good in screwed up ways and not screwed up ways, but it's not an expectation.
That, I guess for me, is very important with regards to what I said about Mr. Wise earlier, and also considering your report, Showing Up White, where you talked about how, and you said specifically, this even contradicts what you just said, because you say in Showing Up White, I am disappointed if at the end of a training I am not verbally thanked for the training. So go ahead.
It's not a contradiction. What I said was that it doesn't mean that it doesn't feel good. It's just not an expectation. But I mean, sure, I get disappointed. I mean, I think, like, I don't know what you're kind of like trying to develop here, but like I stated last show, I'll state this show, that in doing this work, I think that it's really important and how racism works and still works in doing anti-racism work, is that when you're given feedback by someone that I would identify as a non-white person, I tend to listen to that feedback more. And so if I don't get any from non-white people, it can be disappointing. That doesn't mean that it should be there or that it should be an expectation. Like, I mean, I've said this to you a number of times when we've talked, but I'm inconsistent, I'm incongruent, and I'm as authentic as I can be.
Hello?
I'm going to get you 301.
Okay.
You said what I'm trying to develop. I'm just looking for clarity, and keeping in mind that I am talking to an admitted racist white supremacist. In my feedback would be any non-white people who take a position that any white person, you, Tim Wise, Dr. Peggy McIntosh, or anyone else, that they don't think that person is sincere in the work that they're doing, and that they suspect that that white person is most likely practicing racism in the work that they do, it should not be anything that offends you. It should not be anything where you take issue with them having that stance. The only response should be that is logical for a non-white person to take that stance, and you should not be moved from it regardless of what any white person has to say, myself or any other white person. That is my feedback for what you said about Tim Wise as a non-white person.
Gus, you said that like 16 times. So
I'm just pointing it out to clarify.
It's clear, as in Windexed clear.
Okay.
I think that it is important to also mention that things don't always go the way they ought to go. Right? Like, yes, what you're saying makes total sense. I really wish that I never got challenged by a non-white person, or to use your language of, like, not acting like Mr. Rogers every single time. But it is personal for me. And it brings up emotions, and it frustrates me, and those things like that. Like, I think that it's important for me to at least be authentic with how I'm actually feeling. I'm not going to sit there and pretend that there isn't some emotional reaction because it would look better, because that's not being authentic.
Gus?
Go ahead, sir. Yes, sir.
I wanted to interject. So can I ask you it's like an example question, if that's possible. Like, for instance, on a daily basis, if you saw a non-white person, what comes to your mind?
Who are you asking this question to?
You. I mean, just in general. Like you said, it is personal. You have personal feelings. Like, let's say, for instance, you saw a black male walking down the street, and you're walking towards him. What is the first thing pops in your mind?
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, obviously the first thing that popped in my mind is that's not a white person.
Okay.
So then how I would react is how I would decipher more information from what I perceived of that person.
Okay.
Like, by not being a white person, I would immediately check and see if I somehow thought I was in danger. By being a man, I would see if I was in danger. By being Eddie Moore, I'd be like, holy shit, you're my friend. Like, it depends, but the first thing that would pop into my mind is that is not a white person.
Like, for instance, like you said, like, would it be, do you go into your white supremacy thought patterns where you say, oh, okay, black male, here's my thoughts of them, and you go in, do you resort into those thought patterns when you see a person?
Of course. I think that's how we all interact with each other. Just like when a couple of callers ago, the first thing he did was apologize to Gus for all of the, I'm paraphrasing, for all of the suffering that the victim, as a victim of white supremacy, that they have in common, right? Like, that's all based on perceptions too.
Right, but I think the question of the caller was, I'm only guessing here, so I think for him, he was trying to find what is your processes of a white supremacy, meaning yourself. Like, what is your processes for those feelings that come up about non-white people? Like on a day-to-day basis. Like, for instance, Tim Wise made a comment about 2 black pilots. In one instance, he said, "Oh my God, there are 2 black pilots." And he was like, "Oh my God, are they capable of flying?" Hello? Ms. Pettitt?
Yes, I'm here.
Like that. Like those type of things. Do that run through your mind? Is this, oh my God, I don't know if this... No.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm not answering your question clearly enough. There are millions of those things that happen in my head. Millions. And I would say maybe 100 of them I catch and then actually say, wait a minute, why am I thinking that? What is that about? And then I attempt to kind of unlearn those particular messages. Yes. I don't know what else to say. I do need to state this, and this will be interestingly awkward around race dynamics, is that it's 6:25, and I called and did all the phone number stuff, and so if I have to go eventually, then I would hang up with everyone. So I just wanted to find out when this is wrapping up.
What can you tell me what time it is again, please? Or
6:25.
Okay. Well, if you have to go now, I guess that would be it. If you have a minute or two, regardless, we will be done in roughly 30 minutes regardless, because the show will stop. So if you have any time to hang out to take a final couple questions or what have you, that would be cool. If not...
Okay. I just think that it's a responsibility that needed to be stated, because I can't hang up the phone because it will end up the radio call. I don't know if Justice has any further questions as well, so it's 6:25, so if we could, and then you also have the minute and a half or so commercial thing you have to play at the end.
Oh.
So I remembered. So if it's possible, I don't know the person who just asked me the last question, but you were saying something when I interrupted you, so I want you to be able to finish, check in with Justice, see if there's other questions, and then people can email me or something if they need to ask other questions. But perhaps we can set a time limit for 10 minutes from now, so, and then we'll move into the hour-and-a-half commercial.
Well, this is my last question. The point I'm trying to make is that we're trying to get a better understanding of the mindset of white supremacy, so we can better understand what we have to deal with. As Gus said, it is strictly business. So in the mindset of meeting someone who is a white supremacy, we can go through the checklist in our minds to make sure that it's business as usual. Now the questions I'm asking are basically trying to find out what are the things that a white person, what mindset and where are they coming from when they approach me? Are they being racist, mistreating, and also threatening to my life? Mm-hmm. Those are 3 things I'm thinking of when I meet a white person.
Those are very, very real things that you have to think of in order to function in white supremacist society. What I think is, and I have no idea how this is going to be interpreted, but the truth of the answer is that I am also trying to figure out what is actually happening in my thought process. The part of how white supremacy works is it creates a way as a white person that I don't know any of this, and that I have to do my own excavation to figure it out and to name my own patterns. So I don't have a bulleted list for you to go through to check and make sure how genuine someone's behavior is. I really don't. I wish I did, because I would actually apply that own checklist to my own behaviors so that I could potentially speed this process up. But it's painstakingly slow, and I don't know. I can't articulate exactly what the thought process is.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Justice, did you have a comment, question before we get ready to close things out?
I have a few questions.
Go right ahead.
How do white people make sure other people are not practicing white supremacy racism?
What am I doing to make sure that they're not?
How do white people make sure that,
I'm trying to understand your question, and I couldn't hear it because the phone was ringing in the rest of the house.
How do white people make sure other people are not practicing racism, white supremacy?
That is a beautiful question, and I cannot answer it. The only thing that I can say is that as a white person, I'm trying to be able to identify my own behaviors and how I act in situations so that I can limit my acts of racism. And perhaps that is acting as an example for other white people. But ultimately, I can only control what I do, and I'm trying to work on my own acts of racism.
Okay. And I had another question.
Yes.
What actually is said in that conversation between two white people where when white person is attempting to get another white person to stop practicing white supremacy racism?
That is also a very good question. When I have those conversations, I just try to explain what I've noticed in my own behaviors, my own actions, and how I use language and the space around me, etc. I try to have those conversations out loud with other white people so that we can begin to develop an understanding of what white supremacy is. And once we begin, and as we continue to figure out what white supremacy is, we continue to support one another around doing the work the best we can. And so going back a while ago, very possibly that's why I feel obligated to be supportive of Tim and Tim's work. I don't agree with everything Tim has stated. I don't agree with everything that he's done. I don't agree with him on every single thing in the world, and I'm sure he doesn't agree with me either. However, I feel that I need to be supportive of the work that he has done and that he's doing the best he can with what he has, and I would anticipate he would be mutually supportive of my work, even though he doesn't necessarily agree with everything, and I'm certainly not perfect, as a form of feedback so that we will continue to do the work.
Okay, what type of language? Because you said language, what language? When you or I or anyone use words that really we mean white people, but like we'll talk about like Americans, for example. When people typically talk about Americans, when I talk about Americans, I tend to think of only white people. So I'm really trying to be much more paying attention to the actual words that I use. So then when I'm talking about a particular topic, I'm specifically addressing who it is that I'm talking about. So instead of just saying, like, the listeners of this program, I would talk about like the white and the non-white people who are listening to this program, and being specific instead of, by not being specific, you're really forgetting that there are groups of people who are there. When I talk to colleges, I often hear people talk about how there are not a lot of professors or teachers on college campuses who identify as non-white or who are identified as non-white. And I think it's important to use that as an example because there are usually some, very few, but some non-white professors or teachers on the campus who then feel invisible. So it's important to acknowledge that those people are in the space and that they are significantly less than the amount of white professors that are there. That's what I meant by language.
Okay. And then I have a few more questions. How can you tell if a white person, I don't really know if this is the same question, but how can you tell if a white person is practicing racism, white supremacy?
How can you tell if a white person is practicing racism or what?
Racism, white supremacy.
Racism or white supremacy. I don't have a decoder ring. I think that it's a good bet that if there is a white person, that they are practicing white supremacy. Whether they know it or not is up for question, and I don't know how to find out that answer other than getting to know each individual white person, which I think is a lot to ask of people. So I think it is a good assumption that if you see a white person, that they are a product of white supremacy, therefore racist.
When you were talking about the KKK meeting, what's a K, huh?
Yes, I just said yes.
What's a KKK meeting and what does it do? I know what it does. I know what it is. I just want a different answer.
The KKK stands for the Ku Klux Klan, which was a group that was started, I believe, in the 40s. I could be wrong about that, by primarily white men who hunted down or kidnapped mostly non-white men, at times non-white women, as well as non-white children, and developed very, very public forms of lynchings or hangings or murders of non-white people. And what is interesting about white supremacy in its current form is that the large majority, or like I said, 80%, so if you have like $1, you have 80 cents of that dollar, feel that as long as they don't do the extreme behaviors of a Ku Klux Klan member, then they can't be racist. But the reality is that I think of that dollar, 10 cents of that dollar may do things like the Ku Klux Klan did, or do, because it still exists, do. And then another 10% may be, I would like to think, like me, trying to do the work that I'm trying to do. But that 80 cents in the middle is still racist. But they don't necessarily know that because white supremacy has taught those white people in that 80 cents worth of the dollar, has taught people that you can't be racist unless you are hanging people and killing people and things like that, which is not true.
Okay. I have one more question.
Yes.
What suggestions do you now offer to the victims of racism, non-white people, as to what they themselves may, can, and or must do to ensure that racism, white supremacy is immediately eliminated and or the victims very hard to, I forgot what the word is, but I forgot what the word is.
Compensated?
Yeah, that's what it was. Thanks.
You're asking me what I think non-whites should do and to have the system replaced immediately and then be compensated? Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, I think that's also a good question. I would say that non-white people need to identify, they need to do two things. One, they need to identify other non-white people that they can build a community and a family with to feel supported. Because living as a non-white person in a white supremacist society is horrifically harmful and challenging, and I think it takes the support of other people to stay alive. Number two, I would say that the same non-white people need to figure out other identities that they have that are dominant in the way that our system works, and they need to do work similar to what white people do around anti-racism work. They need to do work around those dominant identities so that all forms of oppression can be gotten rid of immediately. And then the compensation, I believe, is when we dismantle white supremacy and all other forms of oppression, the compensation will actually be equity for everyone.
Okay. Those are all the questions that I had.
Thank you very much for co-hosting.
Outstanding. There was I'm sorry. There were people in it. Yes, sir.
Victor,
Yes, sir.
I have one quick question for you. If an admitted white supremacist tells non-white victims that they are indeed a white supremacist working to maintain the system of white supremacy, according to logic, which I am under the impression logic is greater than my perception or simply your perception, does that then mean, according to logic, that we can be clear about who we are dealing with? That we no longer need to say a suspected white supremacist?
I think with Jessica Pettitt, I have not referenced her as suspected. I have consistently referenced her as admitted because she has admitted to being so. So any white person who says, I am a racist, I am a white supremacist, I make a conscious effort to reference them as admitted white supremacists to make certain that myself and all the other non-white people who are hearing this exchange keep that in mind, that this is an admitted white supremacist, and hopefully they will that will resonate so that they will keep that clear that, hey, I am talking to someone who admits to participating in the business of mistreating everybody that they say is not white. Does that answer your question?
It does, very directly and very succinctly. Also, I would like to say that when she said, you've made that, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, perfectly clear in terms of what you said about her being a white supremacist. It wasn't clear to me, so the more that you repeat it, it becomes clearer.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad someone benefited from that. I wanted to, before we sign out, my final, it's not actually a question, it is a request for Jess, the White Privilege Conference in April. I would like to go. Do you think it's possible that you could find some other white people who would be willing to get, I just want a bus ticket. I'm not asking for a plane ticket. I'm not asking for a whole lot, just a round-trip bus ticket so that I can go to the White Privilege Conference. Do you think that's something that you can work on and hook up for me by, I mean, you got a long time if you can do this, by April of next year?
I have no idea.
Is that something that you are willing to work on?
I think that is a really interesting question to ask me while you're being recorded on a radio show. I don't know if you even want to go to the White Privilege Conference. I don't.
I just said I did. I do. I'm go. I want to go. I want to go. I want to go.
I don't think we haven't had a conversation about what happens in that space. Like, I don't know, and that's my honest answer. Is I don't know if, to use your language, if it would be constructive for me to even say, yeah, sure. I don't know.
You don't know if it would be constructive to work on getting me a bus ticket for the White Privilege Conference?
That's not what I said. I said I don't think it would be constructive for me to say, yeah, sure, I'll totally hook you up with some people, we'll buy you a bus ticket, because I don't know if that's possible.
Oh, I just said, are you willing to work on it? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, is this something you would be willing to work on? Because you might not be able to.
I have stated that I don't think it's constructive for me to answer that question until I have more conversation with you. I don't know.
Victim, I would like to interject this at this time. I find it interesting that she would say it's interesting to you that you would ask this on a radio show, when I found it extremely interesting that I suspected she was character assassinating you by saying you had stuff with Tim Wise on a radio show. I find that interesting.
It generally is in the system of white supremacy. I will be in touch then to see if this is something that you're willing to work on, to see what information you need from me. I will contact you once, at some point, it might not be today, but I will contact you down the road about having a discussion about that. I would like to go. I want to be very clear. I would like to go. I've never been. I don't really know what happens there. I'm very curious to see it live and in person, what happens, hear the speeches and whoever else is presenting to see what goes on.
Yes.
I'm very curious.
It is an incredible event, and part of the I don't know, just so that the conspiracy theorists aren't unleashed, is that there's a lot of scholarship opportunities available as well that I don't know all the specifics about. And I'm not necessarily saying, oh yeah, I'll get you a scholarship, because I don't know how the scholarships are being divvied up, because I don't know that information.
Understood. That's why I said work on, but you said you would need further conversation and thought about that, which I respect. I think we are over our time limit, so I want to respect that. You said you needed to go. I want to thank everyone for calling in. Justice, excellent job with the show. I felt you did a great job and had great questions. Look forward to having you back so you can ask more questions. I probably talked too much today. I definitely want you to get an opportunity to ask more questions and or make comments on the show. But I definitely thought you did a great job co-hosting the show today. Thank Jessica Pettitt. Can you tell them your website before we sign out?
My website is jessicapettit.com.
Outstanding. Thank you for tuning in to the Cows. We'll be back on Thursday. I'm going to play Mr. Williams' commercial, and it's 1 minute, 20 seconds, and then we can all hang up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the broadcast, and we will catch you next program. The switchboard is not cooperating. My apologies to Mr. Williams. I was going to play his commercial, and it's not working. So just check him out at counter-racism.com. Lots of constructive information. My show is there as well. Thank you, everybody, for checking out the program. We will catch you next program.
Are you still there?
Hello?
Hi, Justice. Am I supposed to hang up the phone? Hello? Hello?